Hello and welcome to The Libertarian Perspective, a discussion of state, local, and national issues with a libertarian flair. My name is Doug Klippel. I'm the former state chairman of the Libertarian Party of Florida. We appreciate you tuning into today's broadcast. With me, my faithful sidekick, Phil Labe, regional representative from the Libertarian Party of Florida here for Northeast Florida. Phil, good to see you again, and as usual, we're not at a shortage of material due to the mischief of our friends.
I can't make this stuff up, although sometimes I try. I'll say, wouldn't it be funny if they did this? And then they do it.
Well, Phil, with that as a backdrop, we've got a very full schedule. We've got an overhead in terms of what we're going to be talking about on today's broadcast. We're going to go ahead and put that up. Phil, we're going to talk a little bit about Governor Scott's budget for Florida, kind of the news on that, what he proposed, and some of the reaction to it. We're then going to take a detour into some local issues in terms of a local recommendation by something called the Jacksonville Civic Council, who, at the time of budgetary crisis, actually want to impose a new government agency on us with its own budget, and we're going to ask whether or not that's actually divorced from the economic reality of what we're facing right now. We're going to talk about a little bit more about our local government here in terms of whether they are a friend or a foe of fiscal sanity. We'll get into that kind of a discussion in just a few minutes. We're going to talk briefly about the Duval County School Remediation Plan for their failing schools. They basically filed a plan that is not in accordance with the guidelines from the Florida State Department of Education, which is kind of an unusual way of complying with a state-level requirement. So we will get into that. And then finally, Phil, in terms of our regularly occurring segment of Government of Use of the Month, we're going to talk about our friends at the Florida Highway Patrol and their upcoming series of random driver checkpoints they're going to be going through, and we're going to discuss whether or not that means we are actually guilty until we are proven innocent. So lots of things to talk about. Does it sound like what you signed up for today?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Phil, let's go ahead and jump right into the topic of Governor Scott and his new budget, and we do have an overhead we're going to put up on that, on his budget. You know, he promised this in terms of his campaign, that he was actually going to come back with some specific recommendation in terms of how we were going to cut the Florida budget. So he did unveil a two-year plan to cut over $7.1 billion, that is with a B. That's the good news. The bad news is it's only a 10% reduction, so obviously do the math. Our current budget here in Florida over $711 billion, so actually close to $1 trillion with a T-dollar budget for the state of Florida. Absolutely incredible. He wants to reduce 8,700 jobs from the state payroll. Just to put that in perspective, I mean, that's like 2 full Alltel stadiums of people that are on the state payroll. Absolutely stunning. He did find 124 trust funds tucked away in the state budget, earmarked for certain specific activities, and he's channeling those back into the general fund. So he's going to bring $8.5 billion into that. He wants to reduce public school spending from $22.5 billion to just a little over $19 billion. Hard to imagine, I mean, the magnitude of this spending on education, $22.5 billion, and a hue and a cry over reducing it to $19.1 billion. And then, as I mentioned, this is a two-year plan, so the 2012-2013 budget is designed to be the paltry amount of $63.3 million. Now, Phil, before I get your reaction to this, we do have one more slide to put up in terms of just some of the reactions from around the state, some of the different representatives and stuff. And you know, with his reductions, we got this hue and cry. Representative Marty Keir, a Democrat from around the Davie area down around Miami. Governor Scott is new. I hope he gets an understanding of how important it is to provide children with the most fully funded education possible. We moved there to the Senate Minority Leader, Nan Rich, from a Democrat from Weston. Further eliminate the life rafts that hundreds of thousands of Floridians have had to turn for basic survival. And just in case the viewers out there might think that this is purely a Democrat reaction, we have our own Daniel Davis, a Republican representative from here in Jacksonville. Scott's approach will lead to thousands of Floridians to lose health and social services. So, Phil, first for you, a reaction in terms of the things that Governor Scott is proposing, and then your reaction to the reaction. Are you surprised by this hue and cry that we've seen from elected officials?
Well, I'm going to try and remain optimistic, but it's still February. He hasn't been governor that long, and I'm still waiting for the legislature to ruin this, but it's a good start. Quite frankly, that's really the best type of cuts you can get from someone who just doesn't have you know, the philosophy we have. I mean, really what they should be doing, instead of cutting like $1 billion off the state school budget, which last I heard you pay for that locally. I have a whole separate thing on my taxes for that for local schools. so I don't know what they're using the money for, but I'd prefer to see private schools. I think we'd get more bang for our buck. I mean, I turn on the TV, a private company, for a couple $100 you can teach your baby to read in you know, at 2 years old, but for all these billions, we can't teach them in 18 years.
Yeah. I certainly would agree with you that it is good to actually see an elected official actually proposing some specific cuts. I'm sure, like me, you're not surprised, again, by the hue and cry and the immediate knee-jerk reaction. Anytime anybody talks about cutting anything, they start to squeal like a kid who's had his toe stepped on. And the simple fact of the matter is, Phil, we are not going to be able to get our arms around government spending. We're not going to be able to make any substantive changes unless we really realize that we do need to trim back the size and scope of government.
Well, these people, it's really unfortunate that these people, they believe that government produces things. And in fact, they believe it's the ultimate producer of things. I mean, you'll hear it when they talk, when you say, let's get rid of this and let the private sector provide for it. They don't understand. They go, but how? This will go away. When really they don't realize we have less of whatever government is spending on now than we would if government wasn't involved. Because people would come in trying to be greedy and get rich and make money and provide a great product.
Yeah, you know, and of course, I mean, here, you know, we're just talking about the school budget or whatever, and certainly that is one of the things that, you know, when we talk about, you know, privatizing things, people say, well, you know, what would happen if, you know, that whole infrastructure of public education went away? You know, we'd have kids that weren't getting educated, you know, high rates of illiteracy and things along those lines. Of course, devil's advocate, I'd say, well, that's actually the situation that we have now, of course. But I frequently will say to people, you know, if somehow we had gotten to the situation where the government had, say, gotten involved in the supermarket business and actual food distribution business, okay? And let's just say, as a hypothetical example, the government had taken on the same role in supermarkets that they have in education, okay? And we had a discussion at time 2 in terms of what it would look like if we privatized the supermarket industry. You'd have people saying, oh, you know, we're never going to have any food. People won't be able to get what they need. There'll be no stores. Nobody will ever serve.
Apples will cost $10 because they're greedy and they want to make money.
Well, yeah, right. Perhaps something along those lines. But yet, you know, in something like a supermarket industry, I mean, you've got everything from Publix to Winn-Dixie to Food Lion to Whole Foods to convenience stores to national chains, independent shops, you know, offering a cornucopia of choices and variety and things along those lines that's completely unheard of when the government gets involved in something.
Yeah, look at Venezuela. They're actually getting into the food business. People are already starting to go hungry, and food is starting to rot in the government warehouses. It's really sad. I feel for those people.
Right. So, you know, again, I think, you know, maybe naturally for us as libertarians, maybe a slightly different philosophical perspective for maybe people that are viewing on the show who you know, don't maybe think about things the same way as we do, whatever. But basically, when the government gets into the role of being a provider of service, choice tends to go down, cost tends to go up, efficiency certainly tends to go down. And basically, you can apply that model to virtually any aspect of society, any aspect of life.
Absolutely. And I think that's why you have these people saying crazy things. I mean, basic survival, the government provides basic survival. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, you know, we talked a little bit about the schools, but just, you know, back to the budget issue and kind of wrap this topic up. You know, some people would say, hey, you know, what Governor Scott proposes is a great start. It needs to you know, increase in magnitude in terms of cuts. There are probably some people saying he didn't cut enough. Other people are saying he cut too much. What is your take on the argument that, you know, we didn't get to the situation that we're in today overnight, and that maybe this kind of gradual reduction is really the only politically feasible way that we can go about doing this?
Personally, I kind of like a big cut faster, because then people will see the benefits of, you know, I don't have to pay as many taxes. And the worry I have about the gradual reduction is that basically as you flip-flop between parties because the voters are fickle, you know, you'll have it move back in the other direction. I hope he locks some of these in, but if we end up and it continues, I'm fine with that, because it'll save our state, you know.
Phil, what about some of the maybe the cynics out there or whatever, and you and I are familiar with them because a lot of them would kind of maybe align themselves with the libertarian philosophy that basically say, look, people have been so conditioned to look to the government for handouts, look to the government for special dispensation on things, that basically we've created a culture now where everybody generically wants taxes to be cut and for government spending to be lower, but they don't want their program touched, or they don't want their benefit to be somehow impacted by a reduction in the size of government. Are you willing to be that cynical about things, or do you think there's still hope out there?
It's really about understanding, because at the federal level we have the Federal Reserve, and a lot of people don't realize that when we have inflation, that's a tax. A lot of people think that you can get your, you can have a free lunch and you can't. They expect that from their state and local levels, and they don't really look at the way the money is flowing, and they don't look at the whole picture. So that is a concern. There are a lot of people that they want all the free stuff and they want to not pay for it. But at the end of the day, that's going to stop either way. I think it'd be better if we took control and stopped it, but eventually it'll just all fall apart if they keep on riding the roller coaster.
Yeah. Well, we've talked so many times on this show, and I'll just take the opportunity while I'm on the soapbox here to reiterate it once again, that in my opinion, until we actually get to a very, very frank discussion around what the role of government should be, what kinds of things the government should be involved in, which kind of things, clear understanding of that, it's going to be this kind of a free-for-all, where basically everybody tries to play the game, tries to game the system to get what they can out of it. And we look to politicians who one of the hallmarks of their success is how much bacon that they can bring home locally, whether it's going to Tallahassee or going to D.C. That kind of a model is unsustainable. And unfortunately, that kind of model leads to the situation that we're in today. So.
Yeah, I mean, I actually saw a commercial for free cell phones provided for, I think it's our state government here in Florida, if you're lower income, and they really act like it's a necessity. And I'm like, is something that didn't even exist 20 years ago an actual necessity?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely well put. Well, we'll be following up on this topic, Phil, as the governor's budget continues to roll out, and inevitably the tide will be pushing against it in some spots, so we'll definitely be following this issue as it continues to evolve.
I hope Rick Scott proves me wrong and gets all these cuts put in place.
All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Well, so we're talking about Rick Scott wanting to cut government. Let's talk about a local entity that seems to want to take the government in the other direction in terms of expanding it locally. And we have an overhead that we're going to put up on this about a group that's known as the Jacksonville Civic Council. Now, just a very, very quick history lesson. There used to be something called the Downtown Development Authority. It was disbanded several years back. And then there was a kind of a loose gathering of the movers and shakers around town. They called themselves, I believe, the Non-Group, kind of a statement that they were kind of an organic group without a lot of formal authority. Well, they reinvented themselves a while back as something called the Jacksonville Civic Council. Actually went out and hired themselves an executive director. And they have just released a report. And actually, they actually want to create a new agency in our local government here in Jacksonville with a budget of about $29 million per year. Quote unquote to them, it's an amount that's not going to break the bank. Well, I don't know what bank they're looking at, but the last time I looked at the bank for the city of Jacksonville, it was actually not in very good shape, and we were talking about closing closing fire stations, reducing police officers and other public services.
If they mean because the bank is already broken, I agree with them.
Big hue and cry about that, so that for them